it's not just about the opportunity we create around technology, but it's the trust we create around technology.
Well, thank you so much for making time out of your busy schedule to be with us and, answer some questions that our audience is really interested in.
It's my pleasure.
Let's dive right into it, shall we?
Absolutely.
First thing that I want to talk about is mixed reality. Can you tell me more about how the average consumer will be using mixed reality in their day to day? What are some practical examples?
Yeah, by the way, this is, in fact, HoloLens V2. We're very, very excited about it because, if you think about it, the ultimate experience that we've always wanted is when what is virtual and what is real can blend. And we're very focused today on making that the case when it comes to everyday scenarios at work. If you're in construction and designing something, just imagine an architect being able to see their creation before it's built, walk through the spaces before the structure is there. That's the type of magic that this device enables, and we're very, very excited about it.
Now, collaboration is a word that's been used a lot throughout all the demos that I've seen. But when designing this type of technology, or any Microsoft product for that matter, how do you address accessibility, whether it's economical or physical?
Yeah, to me, accessibility cannot be something as an assistive technology that is done later, but it has to be core of the design. In other words, universal design or inclusive design needs to be that is deep in your culture when you build products. We've done that now with Xbox and the Xbox controller, all the way to packaging of it. Or when we think about Teams, one of the things that I'm really, really excited about is what we've done with Microsoft Teams, which is a collaboration tools. It's used for messaging, meetings, and collaboration. But we're building in things like captioning and transcription and all of these AI capabilities in the context of making that technology much more accessible.
And the mission of Microsoft, a message that you've continuously tried to spread, is empowering everyone. What does that mean to you?
To me, it goes back to the very origin of our company. We were a company that was founded in building tools for developers. And the general idea there was, can we build technology so that others can go on to create more technology? Whether it's a student writing a term paper, a developer writing an application, all of that is, to me, the way we want to empower. And so that's why we talk about empowerment broadly. And it's just fantastic. In 2019, that mission of empowerment is more needed because every sector of our economy now is becoming driven by digital technology. And so that need for tools and platforms that put the power of technology in the hands of people is much more needed.
You mentioned the Xbox controller earlier. I went to the Inclusivity Tech Lab and I got to see a lot of what you just said applied to the technology. And it kind of makes me wonder, how do you see the future of gaming? What does it look like, especially with the phenomena around esports and Fortnite?
To me, one of the ways we're thinking about gaming is by putting the gamer at the center. Once you start putting the gamer at the center and thinking about their content needs, their community needs across all the platforms, it completely changes how I think expansively we can think about gaming. We're very, very excited, for example, with the work we're doing with Game Pass. It brings all of your content in a subscription model to everything that you may be wanting to do on the console or other devices, or how we have now enabled any game developer to be able to use the power of the Xbox Live network, which is where your friends hang out, and bring that network and that social capability gaming to any game in any platform.
People are starting to demand big tech companies, to be transparent with their data. How do you feel about privacy, security, and transparency? How does Microsoft address all these issues?
First, the starting position is really thinking about privacy as a human right. and to make sure that there is that transparency and control with every consumer and every organization, so that the data that is being collected is something that they have truly consented to, and more importantly, they're in control and everything is transparent. And the value, and this is perhaps the key thing, any value that's being created because of the user data is something that the user is in really control of. And to me, those are the core principles. We've been very, very consistent with it. And regulation, like GDPR, is now even taking those principles we had long before even regulation, and now they're becoming enshrined in legislation.
And how is Microsoft specifically creating these tools to?
So today in all of our products, for example, we have the same set of transparency and control mechanisms, whether it's on Windows, whether it's on Office, or how we even at the organizational level make sure that every tenant or every organization has the ability to specify what data should be collected and what it's being used for, and it's all in their control. And everything in fact, we took the subject rights of GDPR and made it universally applicable. Because we felt that it's not just for the European citizens, but everywhere in the world. So we've taken essentially what is regulated in Europe and made it universal.
A lot of people are looking for a way out, to disconnect. Is Microsoft working on any technology, which is kind of funny enough to say that you're working on technology to disconnect from technology, but are you working on that?
And one of the things that I think a lot about is how can technology help you stay in the moment and get more out of every moment. If you think about the core of this company, when we think about productivity, that's what it is. In a world where there's all this abundance of technology and compute, what is scarce is attention. And so how do we ensure, by helping you be informed, anything, even for example, the smarts we have in Outlook, so that you are not endlessly trying to triage your inbox, but only spending time on the most important mail that needs real attention. That's how we even think about use of AI, so that we don't necessarily need you to engage all the time. We want you to engage on things that matter the most to you and get the most out of every moment.
Right, and what about you? What are some of your tech habits? How do you disconnect?
To me, I think it's reading. But not even in electronic form, but in physical form. That's kind of become my real habit every day. Is before I go to bed, that's the thing that I've really make sure that I am able to do. And I must say, it just helps, because I think anything overdone is a problem. And I think it's the same is true even with connection to technology.
And I think this also has to do a lot with work-life balances, and I feel like Microsoft is working on a lot about like the future of the workplace and kind of creating a space to focus on personal, passion projects or whatnot. How do you spread that message of, creating a space to focus on something else with your teams, with your employees?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things you said there. One is, I think that work-life balance is a very important one. And I feel, and especially for all of us who spend a lot of time at work, is to not think of this as a balance, but maybe as even a harmony that you create. Because even the way you go about it perhaps will be more helpful. And so I even say to I ask myself, why am I at Microsoft 27 years after I joined? And it's because I can use Microsoft as a platform and connect some of the passions I have around accessibility or other areas, and use Microsoft as a platform to be able to pursue those passions, pursue that connection to the communities I care about, causes I care about. That's kind of one of the greatest privileges for me, is to be able to go to any part of the United States or the world and see the small businesses we've made productive, large businesses which we've made more competitive, public sector institutions we've made more efficient, healthcare outcomes, educational outcomes, right? I mean, Microsoft's footprint is such that it allows us to do that. And I feel that the 100,000 plus people at this company can figure out how to use that footprint to be able to really connect to their own passion.
And how do you address personal burnout? I feel like there's a trend of talking about personal burnout, millennial burnout. There's been a lot of articles about that. Do you have any advice for people that are going through that? How do they hit refresh?
I think the key is to be able to not overdo the connection to the thing that is burning you out, but to somehow keep that flame, which is the core passion you have, persist. That's, I think, the art form, which is what's burning you out is perhaps over-indexing on something that is actually creating the stress. But what is also giving you the energy is the core passion that led you down that path. And getting that distinction is perhaps most important. In other words, how do you keep that curiosity, the energy, by not just being monomaniacally focused on the one thing that you have just picked up, is perhaps the way to avoid burnout.
I really want to talk about what Microsoft is doing with trying to protect the democratic process, the voting system. I know you are announcing, you're releasing new software. It's called Election Guard, am I right?
That's right.
That helps protect the voting system. How does that work?
So we are really taking the software that is used in the election systems, and we're putting it up on GitHub as an open source project and making sure that the developers all around the world can ensure that the best software is available for both systems that exist today, as well as an open source repository that anyone building new election systems can really tap into. And that truly, in some sense, democratizes the software capability that is needed to hold the elections in our democratic processes everywhere.
You're also releasing high-tech security tools throughout M365 for political campaigns. What prompted this creation of this software? Was it the incidents that happened during the 2016 election?
Yeah, I mean, we started with Account Guard. In fact, now that's available in many parts of the world. It's essentially making sure that anyone who is part of the electoral process and all the stakeholders are not hacked by state actors or others. And now we're taking it to the next level called Campaign Guard, which allows you to now think about all of the political campaign to be protected using the same security tools, which we have a lot of sophisticated ways to really ensure that we are helping protect the core asset, the communication assets of individuals and now all of campaigns.
So we're entering another election cycle, and clearly Microsoft is trying to do something to protect the democratic process. But what kind of responsibility do other big tech companies carry, and how should they be getting involved?
I think, look, all different companies have different roles that they play. I think the key I look at is each company, at least speaking for Microsoft, we're focused on ensuring that it's not just about the opportunity we create around technology, but it's the trust we create around technology. Whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's ethics in AI, these are key things that we need to approach in a very principled way so that customers, organizations can have more trust in technology as they use it more in their lives and in their work.
So what is your advice to anyone that's starting to develop any sort of AI technology? What should they be thinking of?
I would say the first thing is to think about both the opportunities and the unintended consequences. I think a lot of times we abdicate control over our own creation. I think having a core set of principles that allow you to ensure that we are maximizing the intended consequences and minimizing the unintended or getting rid of the unintended consequences is super important, and we need to take responsibility for it. Take bias. If you think about any any language model that you've introduced in a program, you need, as a developer, to take responsibility to ensure that that language model doesn't have some of the stereotypes that one can pick up by just training on the language models, because the bias comes because of us as human beings having biases. Now we have the responsibility that when we create our AI, that we in fact de-bias the AI models that may have been trained on human data.
Can you provide any examples of how it feels like such a complex task?
And this is in fact a state-of-the-art AI problem. We are working, for example, as a software company, as a developer company, we're working on tools that software developers can use to really see where the word embeddings, that's the technical term for what happens when you create a language model, can be debiased. So we are now creating all of the necessary tools for developers of AI to be able to detect bias and then to be able to ensure that their models are not subject to bias. Same thing with facial recognition.
Finally, in your book, you talk a lot about AI. You know, you mentioned Stephen Hawking kind of saying that AI is going to take over humanity, and then the other potential is WALL-E. You know, we're completely assisted by AI. And sometimes when we envision the future, we kind of talk about humans finding their role in an AI future, but shouldn't it be the other way around? Shouldn't we be approaching AI and see how they fit in our human future?
I absolutely believe so. And that's kind of one of the things, it's a choice we make. And in fact, if anything, we've really decided that, look, it's about augmenting human capability with AI. I mean, take something like the eye gaze technology, which is magical technology that's there in Windows today, that allows anybody who has ALS to be able to communicate just using their gaze. That's an AI technology. If you have dyslexia and you are using Word, OneNote, or Edge on any platform, you can read because of machine reading technology, which is AI. Or if you're using a Seeing AI application, if you have visual impairment, you now can fully participate because of the computer vision technology. So I think the more we think about how can we help human capability, human ingenuity enhanced with AI, that I think is what's going to really help us make progress with AI, but also avoid any of the scenarios that we don't want.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all this insight. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.